I had been taught, since before I could properly speak, that humans were a cold species. Not cold in temperature, though their world ran colder than mine in many places, with gray oceans and gray skies that seemed to stretch forever. Cold in the way that truly mattered, cold in spirit. My tutors called them the short-lived predators, a species that moved through life so quickly that they never learned the patience needed for real kindness. My mother, the ruler of our people, once told me that humans loved the way a storm loves the ground it strikes. Briefly, roughly, only for what it could take before moving on. So when my diplomatic shuttle was struck during a tense crossing through disputed space, and I woke up in a deep ravine on a human border world with my leg broken beneath a piece of twisted metal, and the air growing colder with every passing minute, I did not expect to be rescued kindly. I expected to be found, yes, but I also expected to be used. The old stories were very clear about that part. The human who found me came alone, which surprised me even through the pain clouding my mind. There was no army with him. No hovering machines watching from above. Just one figure, moving carefully through the broken metal with a small light in his hand, calling out words I could not yet understand, in a voice that sounded more tired than dangerous. He saw me, and stopped walking. I remember trying to prepare myself for whatever would come next. My people are not skilled at hiding who we are. My markings alone would have told him exactly what I was, and exactly how valuable I might be to either side of this long, tiring conflict between our worlds. A member of the royal family, broken and alone in the dark, I had heard many stories about what humans did with prizes like that. Instead, he knelt down, slowly, the way someone might approach a frightened animal they did not wish to scare away. Hey, it's all right," he said, and even without a working translator, I understood the feeling behind his words, before I understood the words themselves. It was the tone people use when they want to calm something, not when they want to control it. He was younger than I expected, and his uniform told me he was some kind of rescue worker, not a member of the diplomatic guard. He clearly had no idea who I was. That detail troubled me for a long time afterward. He was not performing kindness for someone watching. There was no one else there, just the two of us, and a ravine slowly filling with darkness. By the time he managed to get a small translator device working properly, I was shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the cold, which had crept past my flight suit and into the very core of me. He noticed before I said a single word about it. "You're freezing," he said. It was not a question. "Your world is colder than mine," I answered, because admitting weakness to a stranger from a species my mother called dangerous felt like handing him a weapon. He did not treat it like one. He simply removed his own coat, the layer standing between his skin and the freezing wind, and placed it gently around my shoulders before I could even protest. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it was not gratitude. Not yet. It was suspicion. I searched his face, looking for the hidden reason, the favor he would ask for later, the story he would tell his commanders about the valuable creature he had captured and controlled through small kindness. There was no hidden reason. He was cold too now, and he did not seem to mind at all. "Name's Marcus," he said. "Reyes. Rescue team's still a while out. Storm's slowing them down, so it's just you and me for now." "Veyara," I told him, leaving out the rest of my long list of titles. Even now, I am not entirely sure why I did that. He should have reported who I was the moment the translator caught up enough for him to understand my markings. A member of the royal family, found on his side of the border, worth more in importance than his entire unit's yearly missions combined. I watched him look down at the small device in his hand, then look back up at me, then down again. "You gonna cause trouble if I say who you are?" he asked. I could explain the diplomatic importance of the situation, I said carefully. "That a yes? That is a maybe," I answered. He laughed then, short and surprised, as if the sound had caught even him off guard. He set the device down without finishing whatever message he had begun typing. "Let's just get you warm first. The important talk can wait for people who aren't turning a strange shade of blue." I did not understand, in that moment, why a soldier would delay a report that could have helped his career no matter which way the situation turned, simply because I was cold. The stories I had grown up with had no space in them for a human who chose a smaller kindness over a much larger advantage. He talked while we waited, not about anything especially important. He spoke about his sister, who apparently could not cook a single meal without setting something on fire. He spoke about a dog he had left behind on another world, 3 long journeys from where we sat. He even told me about an argument he'd had with his commanding officer, something about the proper way to fold uniforms, which struck me as a very strange thing for grown adults to argue about. I believe he spoke about these small, unimportant things on purpose, so that I would not focus too much on the pain in my leg, or the cold biting through the coat, or the fact that I was very possibly the most valuable prisoner either side had encountered in years, sitting quietly in the dark with a single unarmed rescue worker who could have built his entire career on capturing me, and instead chose to talk about socks. "You are not what I was told humans were," I admitted, somewhere deep into our long wait. "Yeah? What were you told?" "That you love quickly and roughly, only for what you can gain before moving on." He was quiet for a while after that, still without his coat, shivering slightly himself, his arm pressed against the cold rock wall to keep the worst of the wind away from me instead of himself. "Maybe some of us are like that," he said eventually. "But I guess it's easier to tell one big story about an entire species than it is to sit with just one person long enough to learn they're really just a person, same as anyone else." I thought about that for a long time afterward, long after the storm had passed, and long after I had returned home. When the rescue lights finally appeared through the storm, cutting bright lines through the falling snow, I made him take his coat back before the others arrived. Not because I no longer needed the warmth, because I very much still did, but because I suddenly understood something important. This small act of kindness, done when no one else was watching, would mean far more left unspoken than reported. If his commanders learned he had given away his own gear to keep a member of an enemy royal family warm, rather than immediately reporting a valuable capture, it might look like weakness to some of them, or even something worse to others. I did not want to be the reason his life became harder, because of a choice made purely out of decency. He argued with me about it, of course. I insisted just as firmly. In the end, we agreed on a middle path, and I kept the coat around my shoulders until the rescue team's lights were close enough to see clearly, and only then did I let it slip gently back onto his shoulders. "Your Highness," he said carefully, once he finally understood exactly who I was, testing the title slowly, as though it did not quite fit the person he had already decided I was. "Vayara," I corrected gently. "You have earned that much at least." The rescue team arrived quickly after that, full of noise and bright lights and careful hands lifting me onto a stretcher. Marcus stepped back to let them work, and for a moment I lost sight of him entirely in the crowd of moving people. I remember feeling an odd sense of loss at that, as though something important was slipping away before I could properly hold on to it. The following days passed in a blur of medical care and careful questioning. Doctors from both our worlds worked together to repair my leg, speaking in careful, professional tones about bones and healing time. Officials from my mother's court arrived within 2 days, full of tension and unspoken worry, ready to negotiate my safe return through official channels. I told them, simply, that I had been treated with complete respect and care, and left out most of the smaller details. Some things, I decided, belonged only to the person who had lived them. It was almost a week later, once I was strong enough to walk short distances with support, that I asked to see him again. My request caused a great deal of quiet confusion among my mother's advisors, who could not understand why a royal daughter would wish to speak privately with a single rescue worker, rather than the officers who had led the larger recovery operation. I did not try very hard to explain it to them. Marcus arrived looking slightly nervous, still in uniform, standing a bit too straight in the formal meeting room they had arranged for us. It felt strange to see him surrounded by polished walls and careful lighting, so different from the dark ravine where we had first spoken. "You look better," he said, breaking the silence first. "I feel better," I answered, "though I am told I will always favor my other leg slightly, when the weather turns cold." "A permanent reminder then," he said, and something in his voice suggested he was only half joking. "Perhaps," I said, "though I do not think I needed a physical reminder to remember what happened between us." He looked briefly uncomfortable at that, glancing toward the door as though checking whether anyone important was listening. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, I wasn't trying to do anything special. Just seemed like the right thing to do at the time. That is precisely why it mattered so much, I told him. You did not do it for reward, or for witnesses, or for advantage. You did it simply because it was right, even though it would have cost you nothing to walk away and report me immediately. He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with too much praise. Guess I just don't see the point in treating someone badly, just because I could get away with it. I carried those words with me for a very long time after that meeting. In the months that followed, as formal negotiations between our two peoples slowly began, I found myself speaking up in ways I never had before. When my mother's advisors repeated the old stories about human coldness and cruelty, I told them plainly that I had experienced something entirely different. I described, carefully and without exaggeration, a single soldier who had given up his own protection from the cold to help someone who owed him absolutely nothing in return. I explained that measuring an entire species by only its worst moments, while ignoring its quiet, unwitnessed kindness, was not wisdom. It was simply fear wearing the mask of caution. Not everyone listened easily. Old habits of suspicion do not disappear quickly, especially between two peoples who have spent so long viewing each other through the lens of conflict. But slowly, carefully, small changes began to happen. A joint medical program was proposed, allowing doctors from both worlds to study each other's healing methods. A cultural exchange was suggested, allowing young people from both sides to learn about each other without the heavy weight of politics hanging over every conversation. I like to think that a small part of that slow, careful change began in a cold, dark ravine, with a coat wrapped gently around frightened shoulders. Marcus and I did not become constant companions in the way some stories might suggest. Our lives remained very different, shaped by very different worlds and very different responsibilities. But we exchanged messages occasionally, simple updates about small things, much like the stories he had told me that first cold night. His sister had apparently improved slightly in her cooking. The dog he missed had been reunited with him eventually, much to his obvious joy. I told him about small changes happening slowly within my mother's court, careful steps toward understanding rather than fear. Whenever advisors or curious visitors ask me what changed my mind so completely about an entire species I had once been taught to fear, I give them the same simple answer every time. I tell them it was very cold that night, and a soldier who owed me nothing chose to give me his coat anyway, expecting nothing in return. They rarely understand, at first, that this simple answer is really the whole answer. They wait for something more dramatic, some grand act of heroism or clever political maneuver. But real change, I have learned, rarely comes from grand gestures made in front of large audiences. It comes quietly, in small moments, when someone chooses kindness even though no one else is watching, and even though there is absolutely nothing to gain from the choice. That single quiet choice, made by one tired soldier in a freezing ravine, taught me more about an entire species than a lifetime of careful lessons and old warnings ever could. And every time the weather turns cold now, and my leg aches gently in memory of that night, I do not feel bitterness or regret. I simply remember warmth, offered freely, by someone who saw a frightened stranger, and chose, above everything else his training and his fear might have suggested, to be kind.